Hello and welcome everyone to Planet Texas 2050's final Resilience Roundtable discussion for this academic year, Reclaiming Native Ground, the Pointe-au-Chien Indian Tribe, and the long fight to maintain sovereignty while combating coastal erosion. Thank you all for being here. My name is Heidi Schmalbach. I'm the director of Planet Texas 2050, an interdisciplinary research initiative at UT Austin, focused on fortifying Texas's resilience to climate change and co-designing adaptive strategies with partners and communities across Texas and beyond. We would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the indigenous lands of Turtle Island, the ancestral name for what is now called North America. Moreover, we would like to acknowledge the Alabama Coushatta, Caddo, Carrizo Comecrudo, Coahuiltecan, Comanche, Kickapoo, Lipan Apache, Tonkawa, Isleta del Sur Pueblo, and all the American Indian and indigenous peoples and communities who have been or have become part of these lands and territories in Texas. Our roundtable today features an incredible panel that I'll introduce very briefly before handing it over to our moderator. Patty Ferguson Bonney is a member of the Pointe-au-Chien Tribe. She is a clinical professor of law, director of the Indian Legal Program, and director of the Indian Legal Clinic at Arizona State University. Dr. Laura Kelly is a faculty member in the Department of History at Tulane University in New Orleans and has worked with the Pointe-au-Chien Tribe in numerous capacities for close to 2 decades. Fran Troutman is the co-founder and chief executive officer of Glass Half Full, a recycling company based in New Orleans that converts glass into sand to be used in coastal restoration and emergency response. And finally, our moderator, Adriana Corral, is a multidisciplinary artist born in El Paso and currently living and working in Houston, Texas, except for today when she's in Italy. Adriana is a Longhorn and earned her MFA in studio art from UT in 2013. And she is also a 2022-2023 fellow in Planet Texas 2050's Artist Fellowship Program. We're really excited to welcome each of you and so grateful for your time preparing for and participating in this roundtable. The idea for this discussion really came to us through Adriana, and has multiple connections to work happening across Planet Texas 2050's research teams. The opportunity for our network to learn from folks who have been navigating the challenges this panel will discuss today for decades is one we're really grateful for. Of course, Adriana will tell us more about her work and how her collaborations with Patty, Laura, and Fran developed. But in case she's reluctant to talk about herself, I wanted to share that Adriana's artistic practice is deeply engaged and research-based. I first met Adriana as one of 51 artists selected for the Prospect 5 Triennial exhibition in New Orleans, which was set to open in October of 2020 and run through February of 2021. But after and on top of being delayed for a year by COVID, Hurricane Ida hit the Gulf Coast in August 2021 as a strong Category 4 hurricane, which was especially devastating to Louisiana's coastal communities. Adriana asked the organizers of Prospect if she could reallocate the funds for her major commission to mutual aid and recovery efforts, through which she was introduced to and began working with Patty, Laura, and Fran. Of course, they'll share more about this story throughout the panel, but I wanted to make sure to include that in the introduction. We will leave time for audience questions and we'll use the Q&A function of the webinar. So as the panel moves forward, please add your questions to the Q&A box. And thank you again so much for being here, panelists and audience, and I'll turn it over to Adriana.
Thank you, Heidi, for that introduction and bringing us all together. As Heidi had said, really this group kind of came together after Hurricane Ida. And in that moment of shifting the project, it was going back to the mission statement and really kind of rereading it. And in that, the question that they were asking was, what could the role of the artist be in rebuilding the city? And so I dove into what is mutual aid, who are the individuals that I could connect with and understand and learn. And that brought me to Stephanie Clemens and Tori Bush and so many other incredible people who then brought me to Dr. Laura Kelly and Patty and Fran, and it just continued to develop. And so I'm really looking forward to this conversation and really trying to highlight incredible work that these individuals have been doing for a very long time. And they have an incredible fire in their belly. I would love to turn it over to Patty and Laura to just share a little bit more about the Pointe-au-Chien tribe with our audience. And then we'll go into kind of a series of questions and just a conversation. But I just want to thank you all for being with us today.
So thank you very much. Thank you so much for having us and allowing us into this space. As was mentioned, my name is Patty Ferguson Bonney. I'm Pointe-au-Chien from Louisiana, and I'm sharing this photo of Pointe-au-Chien from the 1930s. And as you can see, houses were on the ground. My mom was born in one of these palmetto houses, and you had everything that you needed to sustain life. Over time, we've been impacted by negative consequences from decisions that have been made without our input, that is impacting our self-determination and our continued existence. And so I just want to share some photos about that show the sense of place of where we are, how we have lived and how we continue to live in the face of all of these changes. And note that we've been living in these lands, which are in the Terrebonne Basin, which is the fastest eroding basin in the United States, since time immemorial. These are our ancestral homelands. So if we could go to the next slide. So I just want to show the depths of these changes. So you can see in this top photo, this is the cutoff canal, the one that the boats are in, the part of the canal going towards our left that the boats are in, that was hand dug, and the bayou is intersecting it. And this is a photo from 1907, and people in our community were fishermen, trappers, hunters, and they built their own boats. They had a very subsistence lifestyle. Also, we had a lot of agriculture and animals. And then the bottom photo is the same area in 2017. So you can see the extreme changes to the land and what we call ghost trees, because they have been impacted by the saltwater intrusion. And just to show you a picture, a map showing this loss, I'll show the next slide. This is if you could go back just so they could see, sorry. This is a close-up of that bayou and the canal. And the next slide will show the map of these changes. So you can see on the left-hand side, this is 1932. We actually, prior to this, there were more lakes, but in the 1930s, there was a discovery of oil and gas in Louisiana and in the Terrebonne Basin where we're located. And you can see on the right-hand side, that's 2010. That is a huge loss to the land. And the next slide will show it in a little more detail. So the red part is the loss. And of course, there's even more now because it's 2022, but this is showing the difference between 32 and 2010. And the next slide. So there's really three reasons for this change. One is that the Mississippi River used to flow into the bayous, and so the land would rebuild every year, making the soil very fertile. But with the flooding of the Mississippi River, there was a decision made to basically levee that off and prevent that freshwater flow. And then oil and gas exploration resulted in exploitation of the land for natural resources. And then this is all compounded by climate change and sea level rise. So next slide. This is an aerial view that Julie Dermansky took in 2015 of the current village site where people live. That is the Cutoff Canal. And where the green trees are is the current village site where people are living. And I just want to note that we had many other village sites that are no longer habitable because of the changes to the land, but they also include sacred sites, fishing sites, many locations that are important to our community and our history. And so the next slide is just showing you that in August 2021, Pointe-au-Chien took a direct hit by Hurricane Ida. It was a Category 4 storm, and it made a direct landing in our village, and it wiped out most of the homes. Next slide. So this slide is just showing the complete destruction of our tribal community. This picture was taken a little bit after the storm because some of the roads are cleaned a little bit, but you can see the mass destruction in our community. We had very few homes that remained, and people did not have water, electricity for months. And the next slide is also an example of showing you a house that doesn't exist anymore. The platform, the stairs to the house are there, but it's no longer there. And the next slides are showing you the community, so we can skip down. So that's an old cattle pen where people used to run cattle, but with the saltwater intrusion, it makes it very difficult. But the next slide I just want to set out is that I want to show, if we can move to the next slide, I want to show this, what we're talking about with the oil and gas companies. The picture on the lower right-hand side is an example of a canal that the oil companies cut throughout this region. And on the upper left-hand side, that's a picture showing how wide these canals become because they're just left open. And it causes a lot of devastation to the land. And the other two pictures, the bottom left and the top right, are showing some of the efforts by the tribe to try to combat these losses. And so one of the projects that we're working on is trying to protect some of these areas and to prevent further loss through creating a living shoreline with oyster shells. And so tribal members and other volunteers and working with the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana to protect some of these sites, including sacred sites and mounds and cemeteries. There are other things that we're looking at, one with our partner Glass Half Full to try to fill in some other sites that aren't as wide as the one on the top left to prevent further erosion. So the next slide is just an example of the living shoreline and how this is functioning. We have like actual oysters growing on this shoreline, and that we're working on some further shorelines. So we have another project in place in the second part, which is happening in the fall. It's only one of our adaptation projects. We're working on Resilient Rebuild, but I just kind of wanted to give you an overview of the extreme loss and how these things are really contributing to our land erosion and subsidence, but also that the tribe is committed to maintaining our area and that we have a connection to this land and our people and our ancestors, and that we're really working towards advocating that we're included in restoration projects and that these projects are done with our voice so that people can live in housing and homes that are resilient and that can protect them from future weather events. So I just wanted, Laura, I don't know if you want to add something here.
Hi, so I'm Laura Kelly, and I started working with the tribe in January of 2005. Initially, it was doing research with the tribe, in particular for the federal recognition petition and for the historic portion of that petition for federal recognition. Unbeknownst to any of us, later in the year, in August of 2005, Hurricanes Katrina and then Rita would come through the area and begin what we now can sort of look back on as a series of devastating storms. And as we know now, with climate change, that these storms are going to be more frequent, and coastal erosion is a big problem, in addition to the points that Patty made about losing soil, the straitjacketing in the Mississippi, gas and oil exploration, and the devastation of the land. What changed after Hurricanes Katrina and Rita in August and September of 2005 was that Tulane University made it mandatory for their students to graduate with 2 service learning courses. And these had to be with a community partner and service that was incorporated within the class, not just sort of spending a weekend doing things. And I'm sure Fran can speak about the influence of that and what she's done with her work. But what I started doing is I created courses immediately afterwards, after 2005, that involved working with the tribe. So Tulane students have since then worked with the tribe on numerous projects. We collaborate with them and we find out what's needed. So those projects change yearly. And in the August of 2021, when Ida hit, the second point of impact was a direct hit on Pointe-au-Chien, and with winds much, much stronger than a Hurricane 5, gusts of winds, and devastated the community, as you saw with a few of the photos there. That was an example of, like, we had one project and then we all switched to how do we help the tribe and how do we help just with that immediate disaster, but also with looking forward, because what's become apparent in 2023 and has been apparent for a few years now is that what's happening in Pointe-au-Chien is happening everywhere. And it's not just a problem that this tribe is having to deal with, but it is a problem. It's what I call an everybody problem, that sea level is rising, that tornadoes are devastating, that it's wind, it's fire, it's water. And how can we build resiliently, but also affordably? Because I think that's the real key there. And how do people stay in their homes, and how does the tribe stay on their land? But this is a question for coastal communities and others all around. So we're hoping, I think today is looking at the ways, as Patty mentioned, with oysters, but also what Fran will talk about with glass recycling, and looking out at that kind of community of what are those resources, what are different ways of thinking about how we build that is affordable, that allows communities and people to stay in place. And it's an interesting dilemma that we're all facing right now, and I appreciate the space to explore it both as a historian, kind of looking back over time. Just even when I've seen down in coastal Louisiana, what's happened in 20 years is phenomenal, and the energy of young people today, which is really exemplified by Fran, and what you can do, and with some creative thinking and some energy. And so, I'm looking forward to the conversation, but that's it in a couple of minute nutshell for me. Thanks.
Yeah, I think you said it best in that the problem has gotten so severe that we sort of need all minds and creative tools at play, just like, you know, Adriana's work in terms of utilizing art to help this problem. And then, yeah, at Glass Half Full. So we started in 2020 while I was still a senior at Tulane University. And we essentially collect glass from the region of South Louisiana, and we crush it up and turn it into sand. And we have done extensive research with scientists and engineers at Tulane University, really novel research ensuring the safety and the feasibility of using recycled glass sand for coastal restoration, which is really important here in South Louisiana because we often have a sediment issue when we're dealing with coastal projects, and where we either don't have access to sediment in certain areas, or the sediment that we're getting is, you know, silty or fine, or different reasons for needing a supplement for sediment. And what better way to utilize our glass than to protect our coast? And so we've been really lucky to be able to work with the Pointe-au-Chien tribe and really collaborate in terms of like what is most needed in their community. How can we help? How can we further the work that they've been doing to protect and restore their coast? And just, you know, really trying to help however we can in terms of broadening how we can restore our coast and protect it, and utilize, like Laura was saying, creative ways to do that. And so, yeah, I'm happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation as well.
Jonathan, if you wouldn't mind just going through the next few photos, they'll illustrate a lot of the work that Glass Half Full is doing. So yeah, I'm just going to open it up for our conversation and kind of begin with a question between Fran and Patty. You know, with the continuation of natural disasters and pipelines, there's been tremendous erosion, coastal erosion. Can you both speak about that kind of interaction that has developed between the two of you, and what you all are doing for land loss, coastal land loss, and what are some of your biggest hurdles?
I don't know, I was waiting for Fran to go, but I can go first. So we're trying to do a number of things. Basically, we believe that this problem shouldn't be ignored, because there should be some accountability to those who have caused harm to the land, but there isn't any accountability. But really, the government has either supported these decisions or been part of these decisions. And in Louisiana, there's a coastal master plan process, which when it first started, we weren't a part of. The last round, there were some projects in it for our area, but they weren't funded, so it never occurred, which is like another step in this bureaucratic process. And now this round, there is a project to include a land bridge, which would help to create a buffer, because there needs to be something in place to slow that saltwater intrusion and to slow down storms as they come in. And one of the things that people don't realize is, you know, we're the buffer, right? And so if you don't do anything to help support us, then you're just you keep moving the buffer, right? And so I don't know if people don't understand that, but we haven't been included in the calculus or the conversations. You know, all of the indigenous communities amongst the coast have been ignored in those conversations. So that's an issue. The other issue is that if we don't really think about how everyone is connected, we may lose, you know, the lifestyles that we have. Like South Louisiana relies on fishing, but those shrimp and those crabs need a place to grow. And if that whole area is opened up, basically becoming the Gulf, you don't have that place for those fisheries to grow. And I don't know if people don't realize that or, aren't as concerned about that, but obviously we're concerned about that because we eat seafood every day. People still rely on that. That's the one thing we still have to make money and to provide for our families. And that's part of our culture, eating all of these foods. So that's very important. So advocating for this coastal restoration, reclaiming these areas are very important for future generations. So projects such as the oyster stabilization are finding other fill material, which is the project that we're working on with Glass Half Full, are using other natural materials that maybe can be brought in, hay or something else, to fill some of these smaller canals are important. So I think it's great, like if Fran, you want to talk about how the relationship developed with the tribe and the project that y'all did behind the tribal building, and then some of the other conversations that we've been having. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, so similar to Dr. Kelly, we started chatting with the Pointe-au-Chien tribe through a service learning course that one of our advisors, Dr. Chariot, was running. And it was the spring before Hurricane Ida that we started chatting about ways that we could partner, which, initially was surrounding coastal restoration and how we could utilize our sand to, work with certain areas. And then Hurricane Ida hit in August, and we completely shifted to more of a disaster response partnership. And like you said, Pointe-au-Chien was, obviously the eye, but it's also what protected so much of the inland from the hurricane. And so New Orleanians in a lot of ways felt lucky that we didn't get the worst of it. Like, we lost power, but we were still there and our houses seemed okay. And so we were able to gather New Orleanians to go down to Pointe-au-Chien and help clean up and help work in that way for a couple of weeks after Hurricane Ida. And from there, the partnership really grew, and we've been lucky to be able to go to tribal meetings and really collaboratively work on what the best projects will be, what makes the most sense for both of us, and how we can kind of move these projects forward, which has been really cool. And so we did our first project just right by the community center, an area that was continually flooded and where there were no native plants that were able to grow. And so we sort of inputted this like drainage system and then planted native species in the recycled glass sand, as well as some willow trees along that area as well, which are doing pretty well still, which is exciting. And now we have plans to hopefully close in some of those canals that Patty was talking about and implement some larger scale projects in the future.
Amazing. One quick side note, when I was researching everybody during in the aftermath of Ida, I had learned about Glass Half Full very separately than Pointe-au-Chien, and it was just really like serendipitous that you all were working together and that you all had sent over 200 volunteers. Is that correct? Which speaks volumes to the help and the amount of destruction that was there too. This next question is for Laura and Patty. In light of coastal land loss, you and the Pointe-au-Chien community are often asked, why don't you leave? And this is kind of coming off of this last question too, but recognizing that this is kind of an annoying question that often comes from a place of ignorance. What's your usual answer to this question, and how has it informed your relationship to the land and place? And also, could you speak a little bit more about the loss of homes and what happens alongside that loss of land.
So this question does come up a lot because there's discussions in academia about managed retreat, and our neighbors have mostly, not all, been resettled to another location. The tribe next to us has been resettled. They really didn't have a choice, but Pointe-au-Chien has made the decision to adapt in place. And one of the reasons is because you can't have the same lifestyle community in another place. We're tied so much to the land in our daily lives. What we do, who we are, is associated with the land. Over 20 years ago, there was a bill to recognize another tribe in exchange for all land claims, which would have included ours. And our tribe was very adamant that we didn't want federal recognition if we didn't have land. So one of the barriers that we have is that we're not federally recognized. And since we're not federally recognized, that impacts our tribal members' ability to apply for certain things to make our houses more resilient. It also means that we have adapted in place to the changing circumstances, from a palmetto house to then a wood house, or a mud and moss house to then a wood house, and then elevating that house. And then, that house is not going to withstand Category 4 or Category 3 hurricane winds. That is not something that should be happening like on a frequent basis in our community, because you should have a buffer where that hurricane is landing. And so there hasn't been any support to make this community more resilient. And oftentimes our tribal members don't qualify for the programs that are in place to help people rebuild after storms, especially on the Lafourche side of the bayou, because all of the land is family property. So after Hurricane Katrina and Rita, there was a road home program, but because our tribal members don't own the individual plots of land, it's all tribal land, family land, they were considered renters, so they didn't receive as much money. Not to mention that the houses down there weren't even valued as much as a house somewhere else, even though the building materials would cost the same to rebuild. Right now, there's a program to rebuild homes to make them resilient, but our tribal members, many of them, especially on the Lafourche side, won't qualify for that. And there's challenges right now because there's so many storms across the United States that are causing building materials to be expensive, contractors not accessible. So people are converting sheds into homes. This is not sustainable. People are living in FEMA trailers and they're getting notices that they'll have to pay $2,200 a month to stay in a FEMA trailer, which is more than many people's mortgages. Like these things are happening without any thought or consequence, that the people here, are not leaving, but they need to be in resilient homes. And there should be some assistance for that, because they did not contribute to this problem, which is causing this harm. It's not like in other places where they're moving somewhere because they want to be, in a nice fishing area or on the water. Like this is our home.
Yeah, I think when working with students and the students working with the tribe, that there's certain challenges, just mental challenges that we need to address and talk about and discuss. And one of them is the significance of place to identity and heritage and culture. And, the average American moves every 7 years. And Tulane University is filled with nothing but students who are primarily from New York, New Jersey, California, Chicago. And usually, on the first day of class, I'll ask them, I'm like, okay, so where do your grandparents live? They live in New Jersey. Where do your parents live? Oh, they live in Chicago. Where does your uncle, brother, sister? And they're all over because they've moved all over. And so even if you're born, like I'm born in New York City. I've lived in many different places, and that's the complete opposite of the experience of Pointe-au-Chien and of a lot of First Nations, that they are rooted completely to that literal geographical place in terms of sacred spots, in terms of stories, in terms of kinship, in terms of livelihood, in terms of every way you would define yourself, your lifestyle, and how intertwined it is. And that the idea of we'll just move somewhere else, you can't take all of that with you and move it somewhere else. And also, as Patty was pointing out with a few things here, it's not a practical solution. With what money, with what funds going where, doing what, and in the process destroying everything that defines that tribe and that gives the strength and the love and the community of that tribe. And so that's, I think, one of his, contemporarily and historically kind of realizing that when we speak about Indigenous, when we speak about First Nations of North America, we really are speaking about people who were here first. And since North America is made up of a nation otherwise of immigrants, and I have Irish, Scottish, British, French, and that's the usual kind of mutt mix, whatever that you'll get, it gives you a different sense of identity. And so I think one of the very special things, and something students take away from, is working with the tribe, is having that opportunity of working with them. That's different than working with other communities. And, to beat the drum again, though, what they're facing is what's happening all around. And it is that every one person's problem. And that why don't we work together to figure out how can we make everyone's home, safe and built out of strong materials, and to, build upon that foundation, because we need to. That's where we are. And being part of that process is really important. It's one of the best things about working with students, is that they go down there, and it's one thing to talk about land loss. It's a whole other experience to go down there and see it, and to talk about a football field being lost every sort of 90 minutes. Like the length of this roundtable today, a football field of land in Louisiana will go underwater, completely be gone. And to kind of, bring those worlds together and say, okay, we have choices now. Do we sit by, or do we want to support these communities? Do we want to buy local shrimp? Yes, we want to buy local shrimp, but what does that mean? That means that we have to make sure we have local crab to buy. How can we look at it, break the problem down, and then start looking small ways? Because I think it's any foundation, any brick, there's the small pieces all put together can create an incredible structure. So, yeah.
This question leads into so much of what you're talking about, Laura, in academia, and acknowledging that we're in this academic setting. I'm curious to hear how working with faculty and students has been, both beneficial and, has also hindered your efforts. If you can speak, you as well, Patty, especially with, what might be some teaching methods to be used in working with communities who have been impacted. I think you both have shared with me, and I think it's really important the way that you're approaching it. I mean, Fran is like a direct, example of that too. If you could also speak about that after them, Fran,
I find that the students are really open, and they're curious, and people who sign up for the class want to know more, right? Because it's not a mandatory class. It's not English 101, and somebody seeking out a course about Indian tribes in Gulf South has got a certain level of curiosity, and it's mandatory service learning. You still have to break down a lot of preconceived ideas. I think probably the bigger picture with academia sometimes is the white saviorism, the kind of like, let us go in and save your community, but not talk and collaborate with the community. So, there's down in Pointe-au-Chien and with native plants and dying and what works and what has managed to adapt to salt water. You just have to ask tribal members down there, like ask them about the plants. I don't need to bring an expert from somewhere else who's never been down there to come down there and lecture to people about these are the plants you need. Now, maybe there could be collaboration, because collaboration is fantastic. But listening seems to be a problem that people like in my position, sometimes we're not always the best listeners because we're used to being the experts in our field. And so we sometimes have a hard time moving out of that role and moving into one of collaboration. And so that's probably the thing that when I've introduced other people to the tribe and who want to offer help and work with the tribe is something to emphasize, that it's a collaboration model, and to find out first, what does the tribe need, right? Not what do you have to give, but what does the tribe need? And like with the service learning projects, they change every single year, because it's like, what do you need? Oh, well, we're working on a school. Let's work on curriculum projects. I'm like, okay. And we go back and we work with the students on this. What do you need this time? We've done projects where we did oral histories. We've taken down recipes from the elders so we could capture that. But that came from what the tribe said, this would be a great project to work on right now. Various aspects of federal recognition where they participated, but that's what the relationship is.
I just want to echo what Laura said and note that when we started working with Tulane, it's been a collaborative relationship. And so since we had that relationship that existed, that's why CPS, the Center for Public Service, was helpful. They actually arranged buses to bring students to Pointe-au-Chien every weekend. And for other students who had been in service learning classes, they wanted to reach out and assist after Hurricane Ida. And Glass Half Full was coordinated on their own. They were some of the first volunteers down there. And that was a huge blessing, because the federal and state people, that was like months later. That wasn't anywhere even to be found. I mean, so even just helping the tribal members cleared the road. But I mean, really, there was so much stuff everywhere to, assist people in cleaning their yards. And we have like a lot of elders in our community. For them to do that, it was a blessing for everyone, because some people, when they evacuated for the storm had COVID and they were in the hospital. And so there were people cleaning their yards. And so when they got home, their yards were clean, right? So that's very helpful. But I also want to say that we have a lot of researchers and people from universities that reach out to us. And usually they already have their ideas and what they want to, what they think they're going to find. But they haven't thought about whether these projects would actually be beneficial to us. And we have a research protocol that we developed for our tribe, which includes information such as our traditional knowledge, and who maintains or has the right to information. Because in the past, you had researchers who would come in and they were like, it's like they discovered something, without recognizing whose information this is. And it's, unfortunate, but I think we have been working now with a number of people who have gained that trust because they've been in the community for so long. So when new people come in, you have to be able to gain the trust, because if the tribe doesn't, if there's just something that's off, they're not going to approve, the agreement or the project, or if it's not needed, the tribe might just say it's not needed, like you have decided that, but we don't need an app to tell us how vulnerable we are to coastal erosion or land loss. You know, how is that going to benefit us? So anyway, there are ways to find solutions and to work with academics. And we realize that, you know, some of this is funding based, but it is good to have those conversations. And I think Francisca can talk about them coming to the community, having to present to council, getting their research protocol approved, which I think is the right way to do it. Because then
Absolutely.
you both have ownership in the projects.
Yeah, I've been so happy with the way that things are, you know, there's a protocol in place. Like you said, there's a research protocol, and then being able to attend a council meeting and it not having researchers talk at you of like, yeah, this is what we're going to do. No, it's a collaborative process of, okay, this is what we're thinking. What do you think? You know, we have our contact Pete that we're texting and calling all the time of, okay, what do you think about this? You know, going to see the land as well and see the areas that we would be working in, not just like, you know, calling in from New Orleans, like, oh, let's do this. I think for me, that's been the biggest struggle, I would say, in terms of working with a large research group at Tulane, is that a lot of those researchers, most of which are not from here, you know, most professors are coming in from somewhere else and now live here and do their research here. And yeah, they have their preconceived notions. They have, you know, their ideas of what should be done. And so kind of having to play that like barrier of, okay, no, you can't have Pete's number, like, and call him all the time. And, you know, kind of working through, yeah, what their ideas are, and then what actual collaboration looks like, is an interesting role to play. But I think the tribe has an excellent sort of protocol of how things are done and how things should be done.
Are some of the research protocols available for others to kind of read or cite and learn from?
Yeah, we have a research protocol and a confidentiality agreement that we can share. I mean, it's specific to our tribe, but yeah.
And what are maybe some additional research partnerships that would be, you know, helpful for you all in these efforts?
So right now we're really focused on resilient rebuild, not just of homes, but the whole landscape, taking everything into account, which includes protection further out. Also, you know, filling in these canals, protecting sacred sites. So, you know, one of the things we're looking at is nature-based solutions, like what could be done. You know, are there landscape architects who could look at that, because we have different projects going on. And I think it seems like for the most part, there's conversations happening, but there's, you know, there's a lot of need. So it's not like a competition. Like, you know, there's only so much each group can do, but it's good to be working together on those things and have an overall plan. And then the other thing is having resilient homes, and that means having homes that if there is a hurricane that hits, that they are able to have water and power, like not relying on the grid, because we know they're not going to come and you know, fix our water and electricity first. It might be 2 months down or however many months after, as it was for Hurricane Ida. But I think making our communities our homes withstand those hurricane winds, but also be more self-reliant, that would be helpful, because, you know, even like every week, like the electricity may go out because a pole is moving, you know, I mean, or the internet goes, something's going out all the time. But, you know, if it goes out for a prolonged period of time and you have caught shrimp during the shrimp season, you're putting it up to eat it in the winter, and you're not able to, you know, keep that or maintain it because you've lost that because your electricity's gone out. So you've lost like a food resource. So those sorts of things I think would be helpful, thinking about the greater thing. What are some other options to make the tribe and tribal members more resilient and less reliant on government services?
Yeah, I was gonna add to that. And I think this is when the experience of the tribe becomes the experience of everyone, because before with the hurricanes, it was always a water issue. So you just built higher. So when I started working with the tribe in 2005, a lot of the houses were just 3 feet above ground. Like they look like New Orleans houses. And then after that, and then 2008 with hurricanes Gustav and Ike, they got higher. And then 2012 higher until some of them are 18 feet above ground, 16, 18 feet. That's water in, water out. Ida was a wind, right? Was a windstorm. And so when you're 18 feet above ground, 16 feet above ground, you become very vulnerable. But if you flip it on its head, wind is a problem that other communities suffer from, right? Strong wind. So to look at the houses, like 90% of the houses were completely destroyed, like a bomb went off, but 10% weren't. And what was it about those 10%? Why did that roof stay on? Why did they remain intact? These aren't super duper expensive houses. So what is it about that? And how can communities that are dealing with high wind issues, how do you work together with that communication, right? And with water, and how do you think about those kind of building? But also I think it ties into that larger question that we're having right now, and that is, how do we all become more self-sustaining? And what Patty was saying is, and let me emphasize this, that this community was without water for months, without electricity for months. I mean, you were going down to the bayou to get buckets of water. Think about how you use water every day, from flushing your toilet to washing the dishes to your clothes to a shower. And water, you build a cistern, right? But what about the energy? What about the solar? How do you do those things so when a disaster hits, or a disaster doesn't hit, but you just lose the power, and then you lose the food? And one of the traditions of this tribe is that you, during various seasons, shrimping, fishing, you get enough to last until the next season. You also get enough to share with your neighbors and to share with your kin and to share with the elders who are no longer able to do that. So losing a food resource isn't just like, oh, I just lost a few things in my freezer, I'll go down to the store. We're talking about food for months, and food that multiple families can share. So how do you become energy independent, but again, affordable? It's got to be affordable, and it's got to be able to withstand certain natural disasters that, again, are inflicting lots of communities. So I think, if you want to talk about what kind of partnerships, why not make what's happening in Pointe-au-Chien the microcosm that can be, the ripple effect can be shared over communities across America? That would be ideal. They deal with heat, they deal with humidity, they deal with water, they deal with wind. So far I haven't dealt with fire, but let's hopefully that's not a case. But that would I think about looking at partnerships is those kind of building blocks.
I want to thank you all for answering each of these questions in the conversation. I'd like to open it up to audience members if they have any questions for some of our panelists. I think Heidi, you were gonna share some of those maybe.
There aren't any more in the Q&A, but if folks have questions, please add those to the Q&A. I did have a question that I sent over to Adriana for Patty, going back to when you were talking about the challenges with the tribe's federal recognition and that being tied to leaving the land. And I was wondering if is that still the deal, quote unquote, or are there other challenges that you all are fighting to get that federal recognition?
So we've been in the federal acknowledgement process since the mid-1990s.
Wow.
And the process usually takes several decades, and it's pretty expensive. You have to have experts. Laura's our historian for our petition, but we have anthropologists, genealogists. It's a lot of work to put the petitions together and submit them. And then it could take decades for the Bureau to review them and give you feedback. So that is a challenge, because while we're waiting, through this process, we have a lot of rights that aren't being respected. If we were federally recognized right after a storm, FEMA would be working with us directly. We wouldn't have to be worrying about these rules that may be in place for a housing project, because whoever's giving the money, HUD, says, well, you have to have flood insurance if you rebuild a home. And if the home is being built 15 feet in the air, why do you need flood insurance? Like, it's hard to get flood insurance, but why do you need flood insurance? Like, if it floods more than 15 feet, like Houston, we have a problem. But people can't afford that, right? Or afford the insurance or things like that. And we could work directly with HUD or FEMA or any of these federal agencies if we were federally recognized. And so the problem is, our state and local authorities oftentimes overlook the needs of our community, even though they have a responsibility to us as well. But the process for federal recognition is challenging, and it doesn't mean that you don't exist until that time, right? So we're trying to assert our self-determination through all of these projects and our actions and taking care of our community, despite this lack of federal recognition, which was basically created in the 1970s.
Thank you.
I wanted to add one thing about the time that it takes decades, and this is not unusual for Pointe-au-Chien. This is kind of the standard, that it's drawn out, and the cost and everything that's involved, but also what's happening to the tribe within that time frame. So one of the projects the students did in 2010, in the spring of 2010, was collecting these recipes, and a lot of them from elders and tribal members, and showing how much seafood was a critical part of their diet. In the meantime, that's being impacted and impacted negatively. And also, like, the ability to grow certain foods has been impacted because of the lack of land loss. So what traditions, what stories, what food ways are getting lost while this process takes longer and longer and longer and longer to do? And you see this being played out in other tribal communities when they lose access to their traditional foods, and you end up processed food and bad foods, which then has impact on health. And you see this thing kind of having its own negative ripple effect, snowball effect, that if you could address it sooner and quicker, it's good for the tribe. And again, it's good for everybody else, because we're all, want to eat that wonderful seafood and grow food and not eat processed stuff, or at least I hope that's what we all want to do. But it's just another consequence to the waiting period that goes on with the federal recognition process as you're slogging your way through it.
With that process and having documentation, is what Fran and Max doing with Glass Half Full, is that something that you can also integrate into the process of getting federally recognized?
So the projects that we're working on, those show that we're working as a unit to address issues within the community. So it goes towards certain factors, like there are 7 criteria. So it could go towards the political community, a criterion because the tribe is approving these projects, they're involved in the projects, they're working together. We have leadership who's talking about these projects. So that would go towards a criterion. There's also a criterion on being identified as a tribe. So if an entity is working with us as the tribe, that could go towards that criterion. So yeah, I mean, and it's, to us, it's important because it's helping us to maintain, I don't say preserve because that's like something, seems like an odd term to me, but to maintain our community and restore our community.
We do have a question. Are nutria a problem or perhaps seen as a problem? If so, how is the tribe addressing it?
So nutria has been a problem just because they cut up the land. And I'm not sure, like, the more salt water we have, this is a good question for some of our fishermen, like how far down they go. I know that there, a lot of areas in the freshwater, but they have contributed to the problem of the land. I mean, they're basically an invasive species that I don't think, like in some other areas of Louisiana, they have events to capture nutria. I haven't really heard that in our area. I don't know if it's because we have fewer now than before. I think that would be a good question for, one of our tribal fishermen.
So one thing that I noticed when I was visiting Pointe-au-Chien is that the amount of sports fishermen that were in the area, and has that influx continued to grow, and has their presence essentially increased the property value in the area? How has that been challenging?
Yeah, the sports fisherman issue is very challenging because on the Terrebonne, on the food side of the bayou, it's all family property, tribal property. I think I said that's the food side. On the Terrebonne side, which is the other side of the bayou, we had a tribal ancestor who sold land, signed his mark after he died to sell land, which obviously he didn't do. But then there's a lot of sports fishing camps on that land, and they put a lot of campsites on those properties, and it actually increases the property values because they sell them for a lot of money. And so after the storm, there were some people who were on the Terrebonne side whose homes were destroyed, and so they sold their property, and people want to put in these campsites, like multiple RV sites where you can bring in your camp for the weekend, make these campgrounds, which the tribe is opposed to. But since the parish is under the parish has no regulations for this. They can, like, you could have a little piece of property and somebody could put 10 campers on there and rent them out. And so the tribe is very concerned about that because we were a fishing community, and other parts of Louisiana, their lower bayous are now all sports fishing communities. And so we have said we are a living, working community. But what are some of the consequences of that is that if somebody now sells, it's too expensive for a tribal member to buy it. There was a house that was impacted after the storm next to one of our tribal members that, for whatever reason, our tribal member had sold to this person a long time ago because they think whatever. So they built a little camp, and then they were selling this house that was destroyed by the storm, valued at $36,000 for $185,000, right? But a sports fisherman will buy that. They don't need a loan. But then the consequence that is that the home property values, if you're rebuilding your home after the storm, is that you're going to have to pay more in property taxes because the value of your house is going to go up. And so people are very concerned about that as well. And they're concerned about all of the sports fishermen who are continuing to come in, and their houses, a lot of their houses, camps, like, withstood the storm. These are second homes for them. So anyway, it's not regulated at all. Terrebonne Parish does not regulate this at all.
I have this question is for Fran. What successes Glass Half Full having with growing native plants in recycled sand? And have other organizations emerged along the coast who are trying to do the same thing? And are there research partners that would be helpful for you all that you don't currently have?
Yeah, so we've been lucky to receive funding from the National Science Foundation to complete all of this research, and has allowed us to form this research team of scientists and engineers from every type of discipline, so ecology and engineering and civil and geotechnical engineering and geology and all of the different fields involved in this. And so one of the teams is what we call the greenhouse team. They're continually growing different species of plants, focusing mostly on native Louisiana species right now. So we've already grown willow trees, cutgrass, bulrush, cypress, different native plant species in mixtures of recycled glass sand and native sediment, and then various mixtures of those two. To observe how the plants grow and the difference between the mixtures. Some of the earlier studies that we already have the results from showed that many of the plants actually grew better and had a better, I'm not going to use the best scientific term for this, but better roots, like better, more longer and thicker root systems in the mixture of recycled glass sand and native sediment, which is really interesting. And but in all of the cases, there's no significant difference in terms of whether or not the plants can grow in the glass sand. So they're doing well in all of the mixtures, but in some cases grow better in the mixtures with recycled glass sand. And so those have been going really well, which enabled us to start these different demonstration projects. And, you know, we've also studied interactions with animals, fish, oysters, different things like that. And everything has been very positive for Louisiana specific environments. And so now we're starting to look outwards to other communities that might be able to utilize this. So especially beachy dune environments, we have researchers in Texas, Rio Grande Valley that we're partnering with to look at different Texas environments. We have partners in Alabama beach environments, but we'd love more partners. We're constantly looking at, number one is the sand match. So in Louisiana, we have quartz sand, which is closely related to glass sand. So it's a much easier sell in terms of utilizing it where there already is quartz sand. And so what other areas could this research be applied in order to make these coastal communities more resilient?
I wanted just to pop in as a outsider when I first learned about glass half full, and like for the audience to know that one of the things that Fran and Max have done with their organization is that there isn't just one type of recycled glass. Like they've experimented with how big the grain is. And that was just fascinating because you think about, oh, you're just recycling it, oh, you're just crushing it, but you can crush it to multiple different sizes. So its utility, as she just pointed here, you know, can go into multiple different places. And then again, it's not going to a landfill, right? So again, we all benefit from that work that's doing here, and from, you know, the buying of the glass of wine, the drinking of it, and then what happens to that bottle afterwards. But that its uses due to their collaboration and creativity is multiple. And I imagine it will continue to grow as you continue to experiment.
We have one last question, and this person is asking, are there specific kinds of artists or artistic media that the Pointe-au-Chien community would be excited to develop or collaborate with?
I think that's a good question, because we have had some artists work with us in the past. So Adriana's working with us, which is great because it helps to elevate our issues, and people learn about issues through different methods, right? Not everyone consumes information in the same way. So we want to be able to reach out to people. I am not artistic in any way, but I love art. So I appreciate it, and I appreciate different methods. So I think for us, it's about people hearing our story and our issues. And if people are interested in working with us, I think that, you should reach out to us. There was, I think one of Laura's former students, correct me if I'm wrong, Laura, who after the storm made a painting that was then she sold different prints to raise funds for the tribe, which was super helpful and special. So things like that I think are important. There's also ways that we can elevate things within the community that people make that they might not consider art because it's part of their lifeways, which we haven't really explored that as even careers for tribal members because they're lifeways, but they're actually also art. Those are just some things that I can think about. I think that some people are artistic in creating postings like for social media that I am not able to do, but there's also another form, like different forms of expression, whatever that is. It could even be poetry or, songs. And so we did have also some singers afterwards who wanted to try to elevate our issues. So I think that's very helpful because, we're a small tribe. I didn't mention we have about 850 tribal members. So our voice can only be elevated through others. So the more people who know about us and our issues is going to help us to try to address those issues.
Yeah, let me just chime in there. So yeah, student Sabrina LaFay, she created a wood print or metal print, and then from those ran certain number, but she had not only sold them to raise money for the tribe, but she had an exhibit in Nashville. So people in Nashville that went to the exhibit and that was there for 2 months saw this and learned about it. So, it's the way you spread the message around. Ben Johnson, who is a filmmaker, has a film that just came out. The Precipice is about the tribe and working with the tribe for the last several years. As another medium, Adriana's work, which she looks and incorporates all different kinds of medium to express what her focus is for that particular project after she's done the research for it. But I was thinking also about the school, Patty. They are starting their own charter school. I have permission, state legislature, governor signed the bill, it's law. And working with the children, I was struck when you mentioned, they don't necessarily, children of the tribe have access or think about, work in a creative field, but this is a school that's going to start this fall and it's going to be adding a, grade on each year. And this would be a great opportunity, as I think artists, educators, everyone it's always, how do we help that next generation? And here's an opportunity to have those conversations, elevate the stories, listen to them, but maybe impact the next generation of children of the tribe.
I mean, in essence, it's a whole collective action, right? That's the only way to move forward. I just want to thank each and one of you for being so generous with your time, especially with me as I was first learning about Pointe-au-Chien and Glass Half Full, and even Tulane more in depth and their initiatives. But you all have just been very gracious in all of that for me. So a huge thank you. And thank you to Planet Texas for helping us to coordinate this really incredible conversation and really kind of tease out some of the concerns and resilient ways that we can move forward.
Thank you all so much. This was really wonderful, so informative. And it has been recorded, so we will share the recording with everyone, both those in attendance and people who registered who weren't able to attend. And I, again, just want to reiterate, please visit the websites that we've put in the chat and learn more about the incredible work that these folks are doing. Really, really appreciate all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank